I'm David Blankenhorn, and welcome to The Conversation. I'm very happy to welcome to the table tonight Rusty Reno, the editor of First Things.
Pleased to be with you.
Yeah. I've really been looking forward to this. It's the first time, really, that we've spoken face-to-face, but I've read your stuff for years, and I was really influenced personally and intellectually by Richard Newhouse, the founding editor of First Things.
Right.
Yeah, so I feel a kind
Great figure.
Kinship. You were born in Maryland.
Yes, Baltimore, Maryland.
Grew up in the state. Went to Haverford College.
I'm a fighting nerd from Haverford.
You got your PhD in religious studies from Yale in the year 1990. You taught at Creighton University for almost 2 decades.
The Harvard on the Missouri.
The Harvard on the Missouri. A great Jesuit institution.
Yes.
Jesuits being in the news these days as one of their own. Recently became Pope Francis. And you became the editor of First Things. I think you were working for the magazine a while, but you became full-time working as editor-in-chief in 2010.
2011.
2011.
Yes.
Is it true that you spent a year in a tent in the Yosemite Valley?
Pretty much.
What was that all about?
Well, I was after I was in high school, I got real involved in rock climbing. And somebody said, well, if you're serious about rock climbing, you need to go to Yosemite. So I said, I'll go. And so I hitchhiked out to California and went for a couple weeks, but actually went out spending the whole year there.
Living in a tent.
Living in a tent, rock climbing.
Climbing rocks.
I've always told people the biggest mistake I ever made was getting a job.
Yeah.
On two ends of the social spectrum, there exists a leisure class.
Yeah.
And I was on the bottom and enjoying my leisure.
And that was a good year for you.
It was great, yes.
Wow. Okay. When you became a Catholic in 2004, you said in an article that you said words to the effect of, to stay an Episcopalian, you needed a theory.
I needed a theory.
You needed a theory, but that the Catholic Church didn't need any theories.
Right.
What did you mean by that?
Well, Catholicism is the kind of what I would call the prime substance of Christianity in the West. And so it's the sort of mother of theories or mother of theologies rather than being supported by a theology. Protestantism, by and large, reflects people's theological insights, and it split off from Catholicism, reflected people's theological convictions. So in that sense, Protestantism really depends upon theological conviction. Although obviously it takes on a life of its own, and many people, their Protestant identity is as deep and as rich as Catholic identity is. But I was personally kind of engaged in kind of anxieties of conscience about what the Episcopal Church really stood for. And a lot of it revolved around these marriage and sexuality issues. And I had a whole theory about why I should remain an Anglican, why I should remain an Episcopalian.
But you needed a theory.
But I had to have a theory. It became more and more rigid, more and more artificial.
But your argument seems to be that the Catholic Church doesn't rest upon a theory of any kind or a proposition.
No, I mean, I think most people would agree that Catholicism is it makes a claim to be in direct succession from the original apostles. So it's the fact of the church that's more fundamental than its particular theological statements.
Ah, okay. I just want to ask you about an article to begin talking about marriage, an article that you published in First Things in January called The Future of Marriage.
Yes.
A title I like, by the way.
I know you're very concerned about the future of marriage.
I wrote a book.
We're all concerned about the future of marriage.
And I want to talk about this article for a minute because it seemed to me, reading it, that you were making 2 arguments there. Argument number 1, we learn that you are not happy with rich conservatives like Paul Singer and the people that you call his powerful allies who are out there spending their money to promote gay rights.
Yes.
You say that, well, they're promoting gay marriage, they're promoting idea of protected legal status for gays and lesbians, including in your former hometown of Omaha, and you don't like this one little bit. This is a species of sexual libertinism that they're promoting. It is antinomian in nature, lawless in nature. You say that gay marriage is a luxury good for the rich paid for by the poor.
I'm afraid that's going to be the case.
And you say that the claim of these people that what they're doing is promoting family stability is fatuous. Pause. New paragraph. Argument number 2.
Mm-hmm.
You say, let's challenge these people to see if they're really pro-marriage.
That's certainly what Singer has made the claim, that his support of gay marriage is based on a pro-marriage agenda.
Quote, so let's challenge Singer, his powerful allies, and the voters. After getting what they want, are they willing to support pro-marriage efforts? Then you say, the data indicate that divorce is a socially destructive behavior. Why don't we treat it like smoking or sugary drinks? And you say this is something that Michael Bloomberg should probably care about. And you say, quote, we can't win if we only play defense. It's important to go on offense. And then finally, toward the end of the article, you say, let's not neglect opportunities to strengthen marriage, even if gay marriage is allowed. If people like Paul Singer are true to their claims that they only want to extend marriage equality rather than undermine marriage, perhaps we can persuade them to join us in the cause of strengthening marriage.
Sounds like David Blankenhorn, doesn't it?
Well, that was going to be my point. That's what I wanted to talk with you about a minute, because it sounded exactly like something I would say.
Well, I had your projects in mind when I wrote the paragraph.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, when we put out this call to a new conversation, we've been reaching out to people like Paul Singer, including specifically Paul Singer, and I guess I think you've answered my question, because I wanted to say that I think on this point we're in agreement. I mean, in other words, I was a little taken aback by these two arguments existing side by side.
Well, no, I mean, I think that, look.
Because when I got to the second argument,
right,
I thought, yeah, he says, I'm going to forget the fact that he just got finished denouncing them to high heaven. But then he says, let's see if they really want to be pro-marriage and do this and do that and do the other. And I'm like, gee, that sounds right.
Well, I think that it only seems inconsistent in the kind of atmosphere that we live in. There are many points of disagreement in the public realm where people realize, no, we disagree on some fundamental levels about what serves the common good and what does not serve the common good. But one can nonetheless agree that marriage is a good thing, but disagree about the nature of marriage. It's possible to do that. Public culture never follows exactly the logic of the moral arguments or the logic of the political theory arguments, much to the dismay of the professors, but rather they involve coalitions of people who have common interests, which are often overlapping but not identical. Now, I'm pessimistic about the possibility of a cooperation to promote marriage for two reasons. One,
we're talking now about, I want to get to the various kinds of people, but in this particular article, you mentioned people like Singer, these, let's say, pro-gay rights conservatives. So you're skeptical
because I think that the sensibility that makes a person very sympathetic to gay marriage is a sensibility that makes them very reluctant to moralize any aspect of personal sexual relations. So they find it very difficult to say yes to gay marriage and, for instance, no to divorce. They find it very hard to do because one involves being non-judgmental, affirming people's personal sexual choices, and the other involves being judgmental, which is, no, that's a bad choice. And so I'm skeptical that it's possible. I think everybody's pro-marriage. Most people are pro-marriage in some vague sense.
Let's stipulate that you and I agree that what we mean when we say pro-marriage is not merely the affirmation of the private ordering arrangements of the two lovers.
Yes.
Let's say that you and I are agreeing for this conversation that we mean the institution of marriage that orients people toward certain kinds of behavior of fidelity and faithfulness and so forth.
I think it's possible to make progress on tax incentives for marriage.
Well, you mentioned this in the article. You mentioned tax incentives. You mentioned marriage education efforts.
Right.
You mentioned no-fault divorce reform.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go through those. I think tax incentives seems it's the softest way to encourage people to make certain kinds of choices. Marriage education. I just think I would be astounded if the supporters of gay marriage in New York would support having a simple marriage component of sex education where all that was presented was the sociological data about the benefits of marriage for individuals and for children. I just would be shocked if they would be willing to do that. Because then people would immediately say, but this is going to marginalize people who make different choices. It's going to create a stigma for people who make different choices.
Okay, but here's where I'm finding the argument.
I'm pessimistic, but I'm not. But I wanted to present the opportunity out there for people who
are you going to really win the Dale Carnegie Award for winning friends and influencing people by first denouncing them as fatuous, as motivated by false ideas, as hucksters and blah, blah, and then saying, well, but if they really mean it, maybe they'll do
let's back up here. I think it's very important. There are two things that will torpedo any cooperation to promote marriage across this very, very significant divide about people's moral judgments.
We're talking about, I want to just be specific, we're talking
supporting the
about
institution of marriage.
We're talking about Singer's a Republican. We're talking about basically self-identified conservatives saying we're pro-gay marriage and pro-gay rights, and we're also, they say, but you don't believe them, pro-marriage.
Right.
Well, you say, well, if they would be, they could do this and that and the other, but I'm not so sure.
Well, I could be proven wrong. But so one thing that will torpedo it, I fear, is this general attitude of non-judgmentalism. I think that's a quite significant element of our culture today. And it transcends Republican-Democrat differences.
Yes.
It is the dominant ethos of our culture.
A kind of libertarianism.
A yes will carry the day, but a no is we're supposed to say no to no. To prohibit is prohibited. So that's one thing that stands in the way. The second thing stands in the way is to rule out of court. The second thing that stands in the way is to say that, well, we can't cooperate with people who think that homosexuality is immoral. So, in other words, we live in a context where it's very hard for people on my side to cooperate for the promotion of marriage because we're denounced as bigots. Well, it's very difficult. I mean, what I say about Paul Singer, it pales in comparison to what people say about me in terms of my position.
Bigotry. They notice the accusation is bigotry.
Right. I'm not saying that Paul Singer has said that. I'm just saying that
you're saying it's hard to make nice in terms of a coalition with people who say, well, you're a bigot.
Of course.
Yeah.
Now, part of the problem here is that the civil rights vocabulary and history that gets fused together with this issue really creates an all or nothing environment with respect to...
Singer doesn't say that. And I'm glad you chose him because Singer says... and I'm not picking him. We could talk about Jonathan Rauch. We could talk about Dale Carpenter. We could talk about a number of pro-gay marriage writers who say, and by the way, I used to denounce them too. So it's not me pointing a finger at you, but they say that they're pro-gay rights, but they're also pro-marriage, pro-family. And I used to say, oh, how can you possibly be? But I've changed my mind on this, or at least I'm more open to believing this. And so, see, when I pick up the first part of your article of I felt a kind of it's just no way to make an overture to somebody to say, well, you're no good and you're full of wrong ideas. But if you really believed it, what if he really does? See, Singer says, I've never met the man, but he says that he believes that what he would call marriage equality is one strategy for saving and preserving the institution.
Right. And
I know you don't agree with that, but look, you seem to also be doubting his sincerity when he says that. It's fatuous for him to even say such a thing.
I think it's sociologically fatuous in the sense that gay marriage puts an exclamation point on the sexual revolution. It's when I was active in the Episcopal Church, this was a big issue, and it was kind of being at ground zero, if you will, of really morally serious people trying to struggle with this question about the full affirmation and acceptance of homosexual people in American society. And I benefited from the opportunity to see people struggling with that. But it was very clear to me that as I worked through that with people over that decade, the 1990s, that what was really at stake, the deeper issue here had to do with the sexual revolution and whether we were going to affirm it, whether we're going to resist it.
And you're arguing that,
and so that look,
the push for gay marriage
for Jonathan Rauch I do not believe that we live life according to the logical conclusions of syllogisms. It's perfectly possible for Jonathan Rauch to combine these commitments together. I'm making an observation in this piece and tonight that there is a sociological logic to gay marriage in American society. And it's perceived by the voters, it's perceived by the public as an affirmation of sexual liberty. It is not perceived by them as a pro-marriage vote. It's perceived as an affirmation of the freedom of people to make their own sexual choices, full stop. Marriage is, as an institution, a institution designed to limit radically people's sexual choices. These things are at odds with each other. Like I said, it doesn't mean that an individual like Jonathan Rauch or Paul Singer is not...
Wouldn't be the way they put it. The way they would put it would be what they want is the right to form a marital union, a sexual union of marriage, playing by marriage's rules, with the person they choose and sexually love. That's the way they would put it.
Of course. Look, Jonathan Rauch, I respect the position he's trying to advance. I would just say that is a very, in the moral imagination of our culture, that is a very rarefied position. And that most people see
I used to
gay
think
marriage as an affirmation of the freedom of people to make their own choices.
I used to think
and that's why you're not going to be able to find support for any kind of reform of divorce law, because that's also about people being able to make their own choices. So the libertarian streak that runs through all of this militates against the culture of marriage.
You're a lot more sure of these things than I am.
I agree with you, by the way. You cannot predict the future in this matter. I'm only making an observation about what I think is the logic of this sociologically. And history can often surprise us.
Yes. Can I press back a little bit on the one phrase that you've used several times in your writings, that gay marriage is a luxury item for the rich paid for by the poor? I think I know what you mean, but I want to ask you say what you mean.
Right.
Well, can I give you the pushback? Here's my.
Before I tell you what I mean?
Well, go ahead. Say what you mean.
Because then you push back. I think Charles Murray's book, Coming Apart, is a very important book. and I think it's really key to our discussion about the meaning of the decline of the culture of marriage.
Yeah.
It is not declining in the upper 20%. It's declining in the bottom 50%.
Right.
Like I said, I think that the idea, gay marriage is part of a larger upper middle class package of expanding freedom for individual choices, but then eventually reaffirming the bourgeois mode of life, which involves a fairly significant degree of self-discipline, and that includes sexual self-discipline. I once had practice with a friend of mine saying that it's a very esoteric moral system that lets you graduate from Harvard Business School, get a job at Goldman Sachs, sleep around for 20 years, get married, have children, live with your girlfriend for 6 years, decide you're going to have children, get married, and stay faithful to her.
Yeah.
That's really hard for a guy in Youngstown, Ohio to process. How does that work? And so I think that this kind of esoteric ability to sort of plasticize the moral traditions that we've inherited, make them more mobile and more adaptable to the diversity of our humanity, and then to reapply them in a kind of sensitive but nonetheless firm way. I don't think that that's really possible.
You're saying
for the majority of people in our society.
You're saying it's more of something that can be done successfully by people that are already bringing all kinds of social capital to the table, all kinds of privilege, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Is that your argument?
I mean, I'm very influenced by Mary Douglas's book, Natural Symbols. And she talks...
She's terrific.
She's really great. And she talks about, kind of compressed symbols, enhanced symbols, people who are kind of verbally manipulate the moral system, why daddy, don't bother daddy, he has to get up for work tomorrow, versus don't upset your father. The sort of authoritarian versus the kind of engaged parent. And she makes the observation that, people who have excellent verbal skills and high IQ flourish in that environment. The rest of people are getting disoriented very quickly. Amy Wax, she was very eloquent here in this building at one of your events about how most people need clear rules.
Well, I have a lot of...
That's why I think gay marriage will be a luxury good for the rich paid for by the poor. It's a provocative statement, and I mean it because I mean it to be provocative. It's also there's a certain meanness to it, but I think it's necessary to wake people up to say, hey, this is not going to be cost-free. The moral transformation of the meaning of marriage is not going to be cost-free. Some people will benefit, other people will not benefit.
Built into the argument is the assumption you made earlier that you can't that liberals and pro-gay rights people and gays and lesbians themselves are not going to be a part of any solution that would satisfy you. And I would say this. I hear the argument. I have a lot of sympathy with the analysis that you just gave, but I will just say this, and I don't want to hit it too hard. But
I'm pretty thick-skinned.
If you, in my experience,
my wife doesn't agree with me. She beats me up all the time on these
Tell
issues.
me about it, man.
We're a mixed marriage.
Yeah, tell me about it. If you go talk to people and you ask them about their lives, I'm talking about gay people, lesbians, you ask them about their lives. Just, who are you? What are you trying to do? Tell me about your kids. How are you trying to, what happened to you at the PTA meeting? What's happening at work? What's happening in your neighborhood? Tell me about what it means to you to be married. It's, for me, extremely hard to extract from those relationships with actual human beings the premise that what they're doing is producing a luxury good for the rich that will be paid for by the poor. That does not capture the truth of the humanity that you were engaging with.
Look, people try to live decent, humane lives. I mean, that's an important fact that needs to be affirmed. But I think that, I mean, I saw this with my kids they went to a big public school in Omaha, Nebraska, and I saw it with them. In order to create space for that, it's necessary to plasticize, firm moral judgments about people's lifestyle choices. And we go back to the same point. My kids are fine. They can negotiate this. My son's engaged to get married. I'm very happy about this, and so on. But they went to a big urban school, 2,000 plus students. Half the kids didn't make it to graduation.
Yeah, that's the kind of school I went to. Yeah,
and that kind of. I'm not convinced. And look, I may be wrong about this, and maybe this will trickle down, and maybe we'll get through this with this new kind of non-judgmental, but kind of weirdly normative non-judgmental. But all I can say is that from where I sit now, I look at that and say, again, we create what we are paying. Who's paying the price for the space, for the normative, moral, existential space?
I do agree with you.
Because I look at the kids who dropped out, they have no moral. They have very little moral guidance. I wouldn't say no. Some cases, there's some, and I got to say, the teachers and the school inculcated very firm moral commitments to treating people with dignity.
I don't think you would say that gay marriage is entirely responsible for this. I suppose
goodness gracious!
You would say gay marriage is one.
That's the exclamation mark on a long story, which is primarily a story of heterosexual marriage and relationships.
I do.
I think that's very important.
I think we both agree on that point.
So it's not a question of blame. It's only a question of being honest about what I think that we need to be honest about what the social symbolism of gay marriage is. And again, it's an exclamation mark on a trend that you and I both dislike.
I think the wheel's still in spin, and how this plays out is not a preordained reality.
I agree. Human freedom has a role to play in culture.
Now, I want to switch.
I hope Paul Singer joins you and funds your operation.
Me too, man. Now, I want to switch a little bit now to liberals, because you don't have much time for them either. So you say, in a thing that talking about me on
Irving
first
Kristol
thing,
says that a neoconservative is a liberal mugged by reality.
Yeah.
In my case, it's a liberal mugged by liberals.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look. So you say, you're making your argument here, and you say that you don't think liberals are going to be a part of the solution to solving the marriage crisis or the crisis of sexuality.
Yes.
And you say, quote, "The plain fact of the matter is that it's been the progressive left that has been absent from the pro-marriage cause. To call pro-gay marriage activism pro-marriage isn't serious. It's a gay rights project, not a pro-marriage one. I wish David Blankenhorn the best of luck in bringing them into his new conversation, but I'm not optimistic." To me, okay, you're not optimistic. I don't know if it's going to work either. But I think that your level of dismissiveness to me is too high. And I just want to give you two pieces of evidence, and not that this just proves anything. But you kind of poke a little fun at Michael Bloomberg in the other article. You say, well, if he really, if he was as bad, if he was as pro-marriage as he was anti, bad calories or something, he would do something. Well, lo and behold, as you well know, last week, the Bloomberg administration unveiled an anti-teen pregnancy campaign that included pro-marriage posters. One of them says, if you get married before you have children, everybody's better off. It said it in a clever way, but wait, I just want one more thing. President Obama, another politician I'm sure you love dearly. Now, in his first 4 years of office, he didn't say a word about marriage. Then, the last running for re-election in the summer of 2012, he comes out for gay marriage. That's the first time he says boo about marriage. He says, I'm pro-gay marriage. The Democratic Party adopts it in their platform. They run on it. They win. State of the Union, several weeks ago, President Obama says, we've got to do something about marriage in the two-parent home. He says, because this is darn important in terms of social inequality. What's his idea? His idea is a Rusty Reno idea. He wants to what? Have tax reform, pro-marriage tax reform, affecting low-income Americans. He doesn't say a word about gay anything. It's low-income Americans. Now, so what I take from all this is maybe you should give these people a chance, because once they got through the gay marriage issue, is to use your terms, once they quote got what they wanted on the gay marriage issue, here is a liberal making concrete steps. And he took a lot of, Bloomberg took a lot of criticism for the ad campaign from some of the usual suspects. And Obama is going to take criticism for his, including from Republicans as well as Democrats, on this pro-marriage tax reform. So,
look, I wish them all
why
luck.
are you, well, but
and I support
now
them.
you want to do anything a little bit more than that? How about not denouncing them as insincere frauds and
I don't
out to promote libertinism?
Look,
and you don't think they're going to do anything
that
good?
they're being naive.
If they do good, it's going to be a big surprise to
They're
you.
naive about the social meaning of gay marriage. Can this be overcome by contrary efforts? Of course, perhaps it can be overcome by contrary, which I will support. I'm more than happy for Mayor Bloomberg to have ads that make clever
promote marriage.
That's my idea about introducing it into the sex education curriculum,
which he was doing with this new ad campaign.
Well, we'll see if he can get past the Praetorian Guard at NARAL and Planned Parenthood, So we'll see whether the Democratic Party establishment how far they'll let this go. And maybe maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm overly pessimistic. Look, gay marriage is going to be sociologically insignificant, statistically. What we're really talking about here is heterosexual marriage. If I'm wrong, and if Obama is able to persuade people that this is an important social justice imperative to re-strengthen marriage, and efforts are successful, I will look back and say this was a win for conservatives.
Well, now you're back to
I'm pessimistic again about the way in which American liberalism functions. About how I'm not convinced that these kinds of efforts can be sustained. But it's not for me to be convinced or not convinced, because I'm not, making decisions about whether this is going to happen or it's not going to happen. The question is,
that's not quite true. You're a well-known public intellectual. You're the leader of a significant journal of religious argument and opinion and public argument. And when you publicly poo-poo something as unlikely to succeed, and the liberals are all screwed up, and the gays are selfish, and the pro-gay conservatives don't know what they're fatuous, then that is a meaningful thing. That's not nothing. That's not just a guy at a bar.
No, I know it's not. And I wrote because I wrote The Future of Marriage because I wanted our readers to be able to say, all right, we know what we're against, but what are we going to be for now that the tide is going against us in places like Washington and Maryland and Maine? What are religious people going to be for? And that was written to say, look, don't be naive. Recognize that you're up against a group of folks who may, in fact, not care about our core commitment to marriage. But, hey, take a stand, try to do something pro-marriage, build as large of a coalition as possible. I think it's very important that for a pro-marriage coalition, it's not necessary to agree about every jot and tittle of the meaning of marriage. That includes both sides.
Yeah.
Right? Which is that, hey, you can't be on this pro-marriage coalition because you, Rusty Reno, think the traditional Catholic things about sex, which makes you a bigot.
Right.
Well, that's, it turns out that probably the votes that are going to get behind changing tax law and the tax credits for marriage, I would hope come from the right. They may come from the left.
I'll tell you, I'll tell you, man. I've been involved. I've been involved in this for years, and it's very hard to predict. You get
we get no new tax people.
You get conservatives who think it's a waste of social engineering and a waste of money.
No, that's fair. I agree. That's fair enough. I think that I've written on this on the website, For Things website, on the need to use the power of government, taxing power, and also the criminal power of government in terms of regulating family law and so forth, to build pro-marriage policies. And I've gotten pushback about how this is just right-wing social engineering from the libertarians.
I mean, I tell you, one of the things I really like, there's several things I like about your writing, your arguments, and one of them is that it seems to me that you are one of the, I just don't know that many people in the intellectual world of which you're a leader who are making the point that there's something to fight about other than gay marriage. There's something meaningful about the fact that while the nation is preoccupying itself over the question of shall 4 or 5% of our fellow citizens be allowed into the institution, there's a mass exodus from the institution among blue-collar and middle-class people.
Okay,
and
David,
this is you were actually one of the few people who say this.
But I appreciate that. But I think we do have to, again, be honest about the symbolic significance of gay marriage. I mean, the traditional view is that marriage has two functions, unitive and procreative. Unitive, joining together not just two people, but a male and a female. Unitive, in the book of Genesis, Eve is created from Adam's rib, and finally, flesh from my flesh, bone of my bone. And it's for this reason that a man leaves his mother and his father and joins himself to his wife. So the male-female difference, unity in marriage, has a very deep, powerful significance in human culture. This fundamental difference is overcome and
agree with you.
So unitive and then procreative. And gay marriage is, the heterosexual world has, through divorce and through
other things,
the contraception, basically premarital sex, no problem. In many ways, the heterosexual world has already, if you will, degraded these two elements of marriage profoundly. Gay marriage denies both of them. Doesn't just degrade them, but denies them. That's why it has such powerful symbolic significance.
I agree with you.
That's why it's such an uphill battle for a pro-marriage coalition to, again, not an uphill battle that can't be won, because societies are very complex.
Looking on the bright side, how's this? I was talking to our, I'm sure, mutual friend Maggie Gallagher, mm-hmm. and she says what you just said, and I'm familiar with this argument.
Yes,
I am, and I do agree that liberalism, with its focus on the value of individual autonomy,
right,
and the primacy of the values of inclusiveness and treating people fairly, that it tends to be somewhat blind when it comes to the depletion of moral capital of the kind you're talking about. You're calling it symbolism, but you and I will both agree that this is very important stuff.
Right.
All agreed. I just, sorry, I lost it.
Maggie, just channel Maggie.
I guess I have to go to the next question. It's hilarious.
Well, the social symbolism of marriage.
Yeah, I
Why do you think? I mean, it seems to me that marriage has a kind of when the Connecticut Superior Court made its decision, gosh, what is it, 7-8 years ago, that civil unions were separate but not equal, and that therefore the state of Connecticut had to allow for gay marriage. It argued that part of this opinion was that the symbolic significance of marriage, its sacred character, is fundamentally different from civil union. And I remember reading that thinking, how can they think that they can take something embedded in the male-female difference, embedded in the procreative project of humanity, take it, move it, and preserve its symbolic sacred significance?
All right. Thank you for giving me time to recharge. Just pop back into my
Because that is the issue, isn't it?
I accept much of what you just said, and I certainly respect the analysis. But when I was arguing with Maggie about this, she thundered. She said, well, what's going to be the message about marriage? If it's just everything goes and do whatever you want to do and make yourself happy and follow your desire, what can we tell people under this new regime that you, David, are now supporting? What's going to be the message we tell people? And I said, well, Maggie, how about this? Don't have children until you're married. How about that?
Well, see, I don't think...
Don't have children until you're married. Now, think about...
That's the way to go. I mean, it's a good message, don't get me wrong, but I think this. I think that's...
95% of Americans are heterosexuals. What's wrong with a good social conservative like you just saying, if you can't have a comprehensive understanding of everything related to sexuality and get the world to conform to it, how about just saying, our rule is, as Mayor Bloomberg just said,
right,
don't have children until you get married for keeps.
It's a good message, but
it's a damn good message.
It's an excellent message, but
and it's perfectly consistent with gay marriage.
I think that I would take a different angle. As I said, I think that we have to respect, I think, the historical meaning of marriage: unitive, procreative, and then also permanent. That fits into the biblical vision of the permanence of the covenant between
You're not going to get any argument from me there.
So I would say that along with be responsible, that fits with safe sex, right? Our culture is all about being responsible.
Get married for keeps before you have children.
Right. Okay, but permanence is an important. That's an important.
It's consistent. It's consistent. See, when you say things like gay marriage, puts an exclamation point on the sexual revolution.
Don't have children. Don't get married.
Marry for keeps before you have children.
The before you have children is really an argument from prudence.
Yes, which is fine.
I'm favorable. But permanence is really, if you will, a metaphysical argument. Because who cares about permanence? Once the kids are grown up, why can't people get divorced?
Well, here's the thing, man.
So I think this metaphysical dimension to marriage is actually important, and that's I was both amused. I was heartened, but then amused by the insouciance of the Connecticut court. But they're onto something. This is why marriage continues to be something that most Americans desire. So we're facing a disastrously dysfunctional culture of marriage, but we're not dealing with a society that doesn't want marriage.
You're now making my argument. See, my plea to my argument to you, someone who I have a great deal of respect for what you say, and find myself agreeing more often than not. But when I and you don't have to do what I do. I mean, obviously, everybody. I'm not saying imitate my decision making, but when I changed my position on gay marriage, it was for two reasons. One was because of the principle of fairness, and we could save that for maybe another conversation. But the other thing I wanted to do was get a fresh purchase on the marriage crisis overall. And you may think this is not going to work, but I want to go to conservatives like Rusty Reno. And I want to say, you say you're pro-marriage. Are you pro-marriage enough to break bread with homosexuals who also sincerely want to be pro-family, pro-marriage?
Like I said, I think in a society, you need to put coalitions where you can find them.
And I want to go to these liberals that we've been pounding, and I want to say, do you favor marriage even when the word gay is not in front of it? And I think there's some reason to be more optimistic than you are that maybe some of them say, yes, I agree with that. And I want to go to gays and lesbians and say, look, you're successfully fighting for the right of entry. Very important. But what about participating in the institution, being good stewards of the institution, leaving it better off than you got it from us heterosexuals and so forth? And I find, in my experience, gay and lesbian people who absolutely that is what they want to do. They're not doing this because they just want to score a point for sexual libertinism. They're doing it because they want to be married. And so I'm not saying that I'm right about all this, but I'm saying it makes me feel more optimistic about doing something positive. And you've argued yourself into a box where the liberals are no damn good, the pro-gay marriage conservatives are no damn good, the gays and lesbians just want to promote libertinism. So what do you got left? Where are you? What's your strategy?
Look, I don't have. I'm not a coalition building operative, so I don't really have to have a strategy about that. But I do have to represent what I think is true. What I think is true about the nature of marriage, what I think is true about the nature of human sexuality, and also what I think is true about the direction that our society is going. Now, also, I need to give some guidance to the readers of First Things Magazine to say, hey, look, be open to this possibility.
Yeah.
I
liked all that part.
Look, if I was the czar of the state of New York or the czar of the United States, and I could just imperiously decide, and someone said, you can either have the status quo right now or gay marriage and an end of no-fault divorce, I would say, I'll take the gay marriage with the end of no-fault divorce. Because ultimately, the end of no-fault divorce will have much more significant social consequences. It's not going to happen, though. That's not an offer that's on the table. Right now, a conservative like me has really only one politically, on the table, there's only one offer really there.
Which is?
Gay marriage, yes or no. The other offers are not on the table. Now, you point out is that our political leaders, supporters of gay marriage.
We can put one on the table. That's what we're trying to do with this little small effort, is to put that new option on the table.
Right.
That's the goal.
And if Mayor Bloomberg, 2 cheers for Mayor Bloomberg for taking the initiative that he did, and certainly 2 cheers for the president for the initiative.
And we had some conservatives who signed on to this thing, this call for a new conversation, as well as some very prominent liberals, and we had gay leaders, and obviously.
But I think that the call itself.
In other words, we're trying to create a space for the very kind of work that you're calling for in these articles.
But I think that the call says that a certain conversation has reached a dead end. And that is
the culture war conversation over gay marriage.
I mean, that means that if I stand up and I say, look, this is what marriage really is, it has to have these features, the unitive, procreative, the permanent, that I am contributing to the dead end. That's basically a call for me to, hey, you've got to disarm before you're allowed to come in. And I find myself saying, look, I've been in academia for 20 years. The last thing I'm going to do is disarm. Because like I said, I'm a conservative because I'm a liberal who's been mugged by liberals. And so that's not something I'm going to do. And also the machine, the Selma analogy, as I call it, which is that gay rights are the same as the rights for African Americans in their heroic struggle of the 50s and 60s, that's basically a declaration of war against anyone who thinks that homosexual acts are immoral.
And
because then that's the bigotry. Because racism is kind of an execution, a public execution of a person. To successfully call them a racist, it really is to publicly execute them. Okay. And that I could call Paul Singer names in my columns. Nothing's going to happen to that. But the language of bigotry, I see where that's going in the next 10 years.
All right, I want to bring in some questioners in a minute, but you've raised this a couple of times, and so I just follow up very briefly. Because I know you've written a lot about the notion of the argument of the concept of public reason,
yes.
And you have argued that the kind of liberal or Rawlsian conception of public reason purports to be neutral, but is actually prejudicial to religious faith and people of faith. And I had a very interesting experience on this because, again, when I changed my position on gay marriage, I wrote an article in the paper and I said, well, I thought a lot of the opposition to gay marriage did stem from anti-gay animus. Well, my Lord, I mean, that was more upsetting to my friends who were anti-gay marriage than that was more upsetting than me saying I favored gay marriage. That was the single sentiment that caused the most upset, anguish, anger, criticism, etc., saying that there was animus involved. So and you said before, I don't want to be called a bigot. How can I be a part of any conversation if I'm a bigot? So here's I just want to explore this one thing with you. A lot of people who were fussing at me said, well, you don't understand. This is a sincere religious belief on our part. I said, okay, tell me what else. Well, that was it. That was what they had to say. This was a sincere religious belief. They were taught this from always. This was part of their faith tradition.
Look, I mean, there's a difference between how you come to know something and.
But I just want to say that doesn't cut it with me, and I don't think it cuts it with most people.
But you should be able to realize that. Look, the examples I gave, the Book of Genesis. They're basically the Book of Genesis. Be fruitful and multiply. That's the procreative end. Leaving the mother and the father to cleave to his wife. That's the unitive dimension of marriage. They're both in the Bible. I don't think that this is inaccessible to a Jew, a Muslim, a Hindu, or a secular person. The sense of what's being driven at. The idea that marriage, and then for that matter, human sexuality in general.
I'm not talking about marriage. I'm talking about the belief that...
or the human sexuality in general.
I'm talking about the disapproval of homosexual conduct. Yes. The moral disapproval of homosexual conduct, up to and including making it illegal or in some ways illegal. That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
And when I called that animus, everybody fussed at me.
Well, because then you're basically saying there's no rational basis for it.
And I'm saying, give me the rational basis. And then I'm saying, don't think you've answered the question by telling me that it's a sincere religious belief.
Well, now we're
back to public reason.
I'm not saying
public reason says, give your reasons. And just saying that it's a part of your religion doesn't cut it.
Well, something can be part of my religion, but also be a matter accessible to anyone. Look,
so
everybody in the history of humanity has thought that people's sexual behavior was morally significant.
Sure.
And that they've consistently thought through all societies that it revolved around, that the moral meaning of the sexual act revolved around its procreative potential. This is universal. So much so that temple prostitution is wrapped up in a whole theology about divine fecundity. I mean, so that if someone turns around and says homosexual acts are immoral because they're intrinsically sterile.
Yes. Homosexual acts are immoral because they're intrinsically sterile. Now that
frustrate-
is a reason other than my religion tells me.
Sure, but this is what,
that your reason?
This is what
Is that-
Catholicism says.
Homosexual acts
but
are
it
wrong
said-
because they're intrinsically sterile.
It says that, but it also says that that's not something that you need to read the Bible to understand. This is why Catholicism is very consistent. Other forms of Christianity fudge. That's why it also says masturbation is immoral.
I would
Onanism.
I would be happier if
This is not a kind of
debate.
crazy animus. It strikes me as a kind of, now the animus comes, there is an animus, and the animus comes from the unitive side, which is the male-female pairing. And homosexuality has historically played a very important role in the sort of psychological makeup of culture, because it's the male-male sexual, mostly male-male sexual, less so female sexual, strikes a certain kind of anxiety about the normativity of the male-female connection. It sends a shudder through these powerful general patterns that drive men and women together. And this is why and so I do not deny that there is an historical animus.
I'm happier.
Animus also it can take on irrational and pernicious forms, but it is not itself irrational.
I'm happier. To me, it's more satisfying. And another thing I've admired about your writing is that you do not shy away from saying these things. I got recently this book by William May. I'm pretty sure it's the same Bill May that I knew from the JP2 Institute, who's put out a book by Catholics for the Common Good, and it's called Getting the Marriage Conversation Right. And he says in the book, and I've heard this a million times, he says this has nothing to do with homosexuality, the gay marriage issue. He says this is tips for how to talk about it, called Getting the Conversation Right. Number 7, avoid debates about homosexuality. And then he says, the issue of homosexuality has, or should have, very little relevance to the public debate about marriage. Introducing discussions about homosexuality, gay lifestyles, and sexual ethics and personal behavior can lead to misunderstandings and distractions.
I don't think that's correct.
So, well, of course but I wish I would be a rich man if I had a nickel for everybody who's told me that So this has nothing to do with homosexuality. It has to do with our pristine conception of the goals and goods of marriage.
No, I mean, look, let's go back to...
You don't do that. You do say...
Let's go back to your observation about how you meet people, I meet people. You know, this is 2013. Everyone, you know, here and listening to this, watching this this webcast knows people, gay people, lesbian people who are trying to make lives for themselves.
Right.
Failing in some cases, succeeding in others, just like everybody fails and succeeds. There's no question, but the underlying moral judgment about the licitness of homosexual acts influences how you think, where you think the burden of proof is on how we change our public mores and public law.
We agree on that.
If you think that homosexual acts are morally the same as heterosexual acts, it becomes very difficult to say, well, why should one group pay the price for
I changed my mind on this question about the benign nature of homosexual conduct because I did try to think about, I just tried to think it through, and in thinking and conversation and getting to know other people, I came to the conclusion that it is benign. Now, your thesis that it's immoral because it's sterile is not persuasive to me, but I do grant you that it is a reason. It is something other than simply saying my religion teaches it.
Again, we'll go back. I think that the two factors, you know, like I said, one is a unitive, the male-female pairing, and that's absent, and the other is the reproductive potential of the sexual act. Let's look at them both. Let's step back here.
You're just saying things it isn't.
But of course,
you're just saying things it isn't. I'm talking about what it is.
Well, of course, but what it isn't is
it isn't heterosexual. It isn't heterosexual.
Correct. And so one of the big problems a social conservative like me faces in this environment, and one reason why May kind of counsels stay away from that, is let's look at what's happened. Okay? Pornography revolution. Pervasive. Where's the unitive in that? You read the article in Atlantic Monthly of this woman who divorces her husband. He's addicted to pornography. So, all right, there's that. Then, of course, artificial contraception.
Yeah.
There's no procreative. So right now we have a heterosexual sexual culture that is neither unitive nor procreative. And people look around and say, well, wait a minute, Reno, you're holding gay people up to a standard.
You want to pull the gate up just when it's time for the gays and lesbians to get in.
And I think that
there's some truth to that, right?
There's a lot of truth to that. And so people's intuitions that it is unfair are not foolish intuitions. I think they're based on a degrading of our sexual culture. So, in other words, even though I respect the intuition because it's based on people looking around and saying, well, wait a minute, how come these people are held to a standard that none of the heterosexuals are held to? And like I said, this is legitimate. But my point is, I'm not going to back away from what I think is the moral truth of the matter. And I think my concern is that
you don't have to back away from the moral truth of the matter, and you don't have to give up your conscience rights. Well, you don't have to do anything, but I'll just, speaking for myself, I want to give this strategy a try that tries to build a broadly based pro-marriage coalition that brings together gay rights liberals, social conservatives, gay, straight, Republican, Democrat,
David,
and to do the very things that you say in that article.
I wish you every luck on this. In my dark moments, I see gay marriage as a turning point, and negatively as a turning point. You see it as potentially putting an obstruction behind us.
And I see it having some positive.
In my dark moments, I see the right to marry also quickly being followed to the right to have children, which will converge on a technological revolution, and that this right to have children, just like it's not ultimately at the end of the day going to be a question of gays and lesbians, it's going to be a question of heterosexuals, 55-year-old women in New York City, very rich, very powerful people who insist on their right to have children. And so the fabric of the family is going to be fundamentally redefined technologically. And I do not like this future. And it's not a question of blaming gays and lesbians. It's more a question of how we see our historical moment, and that is one reason why I continue to resist. Not just because of the moral truth of the matter, which is sometimes you just have to sort of step back in a public culture and say, hey, look, I'm in the minority. I've lost this debate, but I still believe what I believe. But I see that future and say, look, I think I still have a duty to try to fight this cause in the public square. Doesn't exclude what you're trying to do, but it means kind of a bit of a thorn in your flesh as you try to put that issue behind you.
Yeah. Let's get a few questions. People want to ask something. Sam, you got something?
I'm getting emails from Elizabeth Markwart, who is the director for our Center for Marriage and Family, and she is moderating a discussion of the conversation on www.conversationcenter.org, and some of our online viewers are sending in questions and comments. So this one is from Bo Weston, a sociology professor at Centre College. He writes, as a centrist, I would incline to give full credit to those gay marriage proponents who do want bourgeois permanent marriage. Reno may be right that some of them don't mean it, but surely some do. I'm thinking of Andrew Sullivan, for example. So that's kind of just reiterating David's point.
Right. I think we need to distinguish between the intent of partisans in this particular struggle and what I think is the social significance of the cause that they're trying to stand for. I mean, you want to respond.
Distinguish between
the consequences of the cause. So look, Andrew Sullivan could be in favor of bourgeois marriage for gays and lesbians, and I could say, well, fine. But I think the effect is not going to be to reinforce bourgeois culture in America, but to degrade it still further.
So you think that when two, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, it's a question. Are you suggesting that when two when a gay or lesbian couple gets married in Paducah, Kentucky,
yes,
and lives in the suburbs with 2 cars in the garage and a couple of kids, maybe because one of them is divorced and brought 2 children in, so there's essentially a step family type of situation,
yes,
but it's 2 women or 2 men.
Yes.
You believe that no matter how bourgeois they are, no matter how much all they really want to do is join the PTA and bake cookies for their children when they come home from school, no matter how much that happens, they're still contributing to moral decay.
Probably more so, in the sense that it's a kind of one of the things about breaking taboos is to realize the world doesn't fall apart. You do something, you break a taboo, and it's like, well, God didn't strike me down, so maybe it's not really a taboo. And so, as these taboos are more and more publicly, in a more so respectable, people can be so respectable. I think this will redefine marriage and what it means. And I think that this will contribute to a public culture that will have an increasingly difficult time sorting out male-female relations, because it doesn't seem as though they really matter.
Because heterosexuals in the neighborhood are going to see this and get the wrong ideas about these matters?
No. It just has to do with disenchanting the very strong taboo structures that push people into certain patterns of life. Mm-hmm. And as that becomes, because 2 guys,
you're using important words, but they're very abstract words like disenchant and the symbolism of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I understand, and I think those are real words,
right?
But I'm just thinking about these 2 people in Paducah, and they're disenchanting and causing symbols to change. I mean, I follow it.
I think it's unimaginable that we could have a gay president married to, and his husband living in the White House without that fundamentally affecting the public the symbolism of marriage and what it means.
Yeah. Let's keep going. Yes, ma'am.
I keep thinking of the example of what sexual liberalism has done in general to the culture. The idea of the luxury bought at the expense of the poor. Marriage in the upper 20% is going pretty well. Most women find husbands, marry, have kids, stay married. Men also. But in the lower economic brackets, there's this breakdown. So we have that as an example of exactly what Rusty was saying, that the one is bought at the expense of the poor. At the same time, if you ask anybody in the lower economic brackets, would you like to be married? Usually the answer is yes. They would like all of these things. It's just that these things don't exactly happen when the whole culture has changed around them and all the symbols and strictures have loosened, which push them on the path to these things. So since that example is so strong before us, I don't know how you could be so sanguine about the next step that's being taken.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that I'm just not sure that the societal embrace of gay marriage in recent years is the main, or even one of the main reasons why we're seeing the weakening of marriage.
Oh no, I don't mean that. I mean just the sexual freedom. You can have sex any time outside of marriage. It's just a matter of choice.
My motto is I'm just going to keep seeing if anybody likes this. Marry for keeps before you have children. It seems to me strict, and it seems to me to include a notion that could apply to gay as well as straight couples.
Now, David, I want to say this. In
In
support
other
of
words,
your-
I'm not for,
Look, and this is what Carol, I think all three of us, Carol, you and I agree that this is a social justice question. Your call for a new conversation, it's an equality question.
that's why we want to, that's why we think we can attract liberals
Okay,
for social justice reasons.
That's good. Yeah, right. We got to try something.
Hey,
So I'm all for trying
Yes.
something, and we got to do what we can. Now, I happen to think that religious revival would be a very good, but that's not inconsistent with trying to do other things as well. And I think Carol would agree. We try to do what we can, but I think what Carol's reinforcing what I said. Let's. I would like liberals to kind of not be so smug and think that even if they think that there are gains that have been made, real gains in justice, let's not be so smug as to not see that there have been costs to these social changes.
I hear you.
Even if they're worth it, even if the liberal thinks that they're worth it.
Yeah. Ralph.
Okay, we're of the same age, basically, and so I grew up and came of age during the AIDS epidemic, and so I watched a good number of my generation suffer and die during that time, and there were two components that, to my mind, created that sort of maelstrom. One, sexual revolution, but also a sort of an underlying culture of shame and hiddenness that was still prevalent in the early days. So my take on the goods of the rich at the expense of the poor is as a slightly different slice of the demographic, which is that I think that those of us who have the luxury of an upper middle class bourgeois life, of being gay and coupled, living in a suburb, what we have to give is not so much to the poor young heterosexual man in Youngstown, but the poor young gay man in Youngstown. And so a lot of my peers think of that as our responsibility. And that rather than doing it at their expense, we're actually trying to do it to help them, to be a support, to give an idea of a kind of responsible life that those of us in our 50s didn't see when we were growing up. And so I understand the idea that you could that it might confuse a certain, I don't believe this, but a young cohort of heterosexuals. But it seems like what we've come to in this modern world is that this pipeline, if you will, of lesbian and gay people who are coming up now, we suddenly have they've become visible, and a lot of the arguments I see that you make almost requires that they be kept somewhat invisible and maintained that way in order to be able to promote the kind of moral theory that you.
Yes,
Okay.
right? So, look, if we are undergoing social changes that, they're certainly not going to be stopped. No one, while there is opposition to gay marriage in many parts of the United States, very strong opposition, I don't know of any back into the closet movements. Any back into the closet movements. That's just it's just not on the table as an option. And so I think social conservatives like me have to try to figure out how to influence public life in a direction that we think is healthy for the common good. And that certainly involves re-enchanting, if you will, the pathways of pushing people towards these healthy ways of living their sexual lives and mating. Now, it seems to me that right? I have a hard time seeing how mainstreaming gay marriage is going to contribute to that. But maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it's really up to the imagination, social imagination of people like you to try to figure out how this is actually going to re-enchant, reinvigorate, have some strong pushes on young people to get them moving in the right direction. Somebody will write a novel, somebody will make a movie, whatever, maybe, that will find a way of dramatizing for people something that's like, well, wait a minute, yeah, no, that's right, that's right, or that's wrong, that's wrong.
See, my friend,
It's just that right now, I can only say this, that in the LGBT world, space, it's very hard to say anything's wrong. It's very hard to say anything other than coercion and is wrong. And that for your community, that's going to be very, very hard to overcome, and for good reasons. I mean, as you said from your own experience, there's good reasons to not want this to have the prohibition words in your discourse. But I don't see how we can make progress without reintroducing prohibition words.
But look, if you want to follow up, Ralph, that's fine. But I just want to throw into this back and forth. My colleague Barbara Whitehead is a historian by training, and she points out that there have been times in the past in American history where you had groups of people that you might call sort of sexual outsiders, people who have not been a part of mainstream sexual life in America for whatever reasons. And when they have entered into the marriage institution, there has been a kind of mainstreamization, sort of embourgeoisement quality to it. So I've heard lots of people say that, once gays are going to mess up, gays are going to affect marriage. Gays are going to have a lot of impact on the institution. But I don't see many people considering the possibility that the institution will have an impact on the gays and lesbians that enter it. That's also a possibility.
Sure,
causation can go both ways here.
Yes. But again, I just think we live in a cultural moment that finds it very difficult to discipline sexual desire. Very difficult to discipline sexual desire.
But man, what look.
And so this is what marriage is, a discipline of sexual desire. That's what it is. For larger purposes, not just for futile purposes.
But you seem to have more or less given up on the possibility of a broadly based reinstitutionalization. I mean, you seem to kind of be
not giving up. I'm just saying we got to be honest about what we're facing, and we have to be honest. I think people in the gay community need to be honest about how powerful the symbol of homosexuality is as a symbol of sexual freedom for a teenager or what have you, because it's like
gay marriage is a symbol of sexual freedom.
Homosexuality, period, and gay marriage as a dangerous thing. But don't worry, it's not really dangerous. That's my point about how the normalization of it, which
the gay kid
I'm in favor of at one level.
the gay kid who Ralph is saying he wants to. I don't know.
Well, this could be.
He's going to look at. He's going to look at the gay kid is going to look at a gay couple.
No, I'm not.
And say that's all about liberationism.
I'm not dividing the world up into gay, straight. I'm just pointing out that, and maybe the time has passed. I'm your age. Maybe for my kids, this is not a taboo breaking reality. I happen to think that the male-female difference runs very deeply, and I think that it will always have a taboo breaking quality to it. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of gay theorists think that's precisely why it's so socially important. We need to have taboo breaking power.
Yeah, I quoted all of them in my book, and now I hope they're wrong.
Right.
Somebody else.
But I'm going to go back to this. I do think it's we don't know I mean, there have been various points in history in the West where the family's been challenged by economic and social changes, the Industrial Revolution and urbanization being the most recent. We, as a society, have found ways to reaffirm and re-norm marriage life, marital life, family life. So in that sense, however pessimistic I'm sounding, and I don't want to back off from what I think are these deep challenges, I think you can sort of say, well, hey, you have some confidence in the healing, reparative power of culture and the centrality of the family as a fundamental unit of society. It's going to find a way to. We're going to find a way to How are we going? But to do that, we're going to have to. We're going to have to re-energize taboo. We have to re-energize prohibition. We're going to have to re-energize the no.
And the difference that I think. That is,
and that's going to be hard to do. I'm just saying it's going to be really hard to do.
That is what I hope can happen, and I think one difference that maybe is a different emphasis between us is that, like, I know you were kind of joking when you said, "Oh, let's have a religious revival," but there was not completely joking. Okay, and I've heard people, and I have many times said, kind of as though it were obvious. I've said to conservative friends, I've said, oh, yes, and to church people, said, well, yes, if there's going to be a revival of marriage, the leadership it will have to be based in the churches.
I agree.
I don't agree, and here's why. I used to say that, and now I don't think it's true. And the reason is that I grew up in the South. I was born in 1955. I lived through a period of time where every pastor drawing a salary who was white adamantly believed that God required segregation. Preached it from the pulpit every Sunday until he was red in the face. Had 1,000 Bible quotations and fell down to lead prayers on the issue of the biblically based nature of racial segregation. And so I believe that the institutional church is much more likely to follow culture than to lead it. And the only exception I saw in my experience was wonderful individuals who came out of the church and who basically, because of their religious faith, were wonderful leaders, and some of them changed my life. So I'm not poo-pooing this, but I'll just say that I think that if there's going to be a revival of marriage in the United States, it's much more likely to occur on a broader basis. Will the churches be a part of it? Yes. But institutionally, the churches will be more like following the crowd at chow time. It will not be some religious revival and the churches lead us into the promised land of marital stability.
I want to go back to your experiences, because I think the Selma analogy is a very powerful one in our public discourse today. Now, that preacher in Mississippi in 1965 could find a preacher to agree with him in South Africa. But that's it.
It was enough to keep things going in the South.
I'm just saying that traditional Catholic, Christian, Jewish, Muslim teaching on sexual morality is global in scope, and you have to go to unique places to find people who think otherwise.
I just grew up in one. There was all over the South. I'm just saying that the church followed the culture, not the other way around. The church
in Mississippi followed the culture, but the church
was the most important issue of my
right. We're all formed by our experiences.
I was formed by this experience, and I did not see leadership. I saw followership. And the changes happened. There were as many red diaper babies from New York going down to Mississippi fighting for changes.
We all suffer from a kind of presentism and the myopia of our milieu. And we have to be careful about that, obviously. And I certainly worry about that. But like I said, I do find myself, the idea that homosexual acts are morally of moral indifference is, like I said, this is a globally unique view that's only emerged in the last generation and is restricted to our part of the world. Now, that doesn't mean it's not right, but I'm just saying that
in bringing up that point, I wasn't trying to relitigate the point about homosexual conduct. I was trying to argue that that on a strategic level, I was just trying to suggest that if you want, and I realize you said you're not in the political strategy business, but if you were, I mean, you do comment on it, and your writers comment on it in the magazine. If you were interested in it, I think it would be the grounding of a pro-marriage coalition needs to be viewed as, to have any chance of success, needs to be viewed as a broadly based and having at least as many secular accents as religious.
Could be for our society at this time, that might be the case. But I do think that the culture of marriage has been debilitated by the failure of the churches to sustain the truth, the teachings of our own teachings about marriage.
Yes.
And so the kind of chicanery of annulment and things like that in the Catholic Church has seriously undermined the meaning of the sacrament for Catholics.
In my Protestant tradition, you had still a lot of the going along with where the couple makes up their own vows as opposed to repeating instead of a process of continuity with the institution. Again, at the symbolic level, it suggests that the couple invents their own private marriage that they create and name themselves. And as someone who my wife and I made up our own vows when we got married, so I can't be too harsh about this. But in other words, I'm just pointing out that I agree with you that the churches have not
been exemplary.
No, and are not likely to be. You have to think it's got to be a broader based thing. That's why I keep pressing you. Don't write off the liberals. Don't write off pro-gay rights conservatives.
I think in the Catholic Church that there's a sobriety over the last decade about this issue, and there's a renewed seriousness and attempt to make some progress in renewing the culture of marriage in the church. Now,
smaller and more faithful?
Pardon?
Are you arguing that the church is becoming smaller and more faithful?
Well, I think that's the trend. I think that the cultural currents are going against us. It would be nice if you were successful on marriage and that current would slow down some. The currents of culture are against us, but the internal dynamics of the church have become much healthier. Whether that means fewer, I'm not so sure. I think that the committed core of Christians in America for the last 100 years probably has been around 25% of the population. Committed core. Of course, everybody was a nominal Christian when you grew up, and everybody's a Christian when you grew up in Mississippi. But
there was a guy was visiting a guy in
but the committed
Virginia.
Core is a different number than the people who affiliate or who want to be known as. Now it's much more permissible not to be a nothing. And people are. But the committed core has not declined as the number of people who say they have no religious affiliation has increased. It's stayed relatively steady. It's the middle. We see this in politics. We're also seeing it in religion. The middle is giving way to more committed extremes.
Yeah.
So I think that this for Christianity in the United States. Good news and bad news. It's good news that we have a greater internal consistency. Bad news that we're going to be up against an increasingly inhospitable host culture.
And you're going to be smaller in number.
Smaller, like I said, the committed core I think will probably remain the same at around 25%. But there'll be fewer people who are fellow travelers, as I would call them. And that'll make things politically difficult for us because we'll be more vulnerable to the majority culture. So we'll no longer be, running the show, so to speak.
Right.
But that's okay. I think Pope Benedict spoke of the role of Christians as a creative minority in Europe. We're much bigger in the United States, and I think we'll remain much more powerful and larger as a cohort in the United States. But I do think we need to get our mind around the idea that we need to understand how we can be 11 in our larger culture, rather than assuming that we can kind of dictate,
Yes.
our marriage laws have to reflect, what the Christian tradition teaches. Well, that may not happen.
Yes.
And then that's my point in this article you cited. All right, folks, if that's not going our way, we still need to serve the common good.
Yes.
And that means getting as much or getting the key elements that we can get in the
As
public
I
square.
say, man, that's what attracted me to what you were writing, and that's what really resonated with me. We're out of time, and I really want to thank you. I've really enjoyed it. The time flew by. Really appreciate it. Hope you'll come back sometime.
Love to.
Thank everybody for watching. Thank you for being here, folks, and see you next time.